Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a sweeping historical and theological framework that completely reshapes how we look at ancient megaliths. We're going to be exploring a fascinating collection of source texts that actually propose a pretty radical alternative to mainstream history. We'll be unpacking the claims surrounding the Watcher Rebellion, the rise of a hybrid Nephilim civilization, and the crazy idea that structures like the Great Pyramids were actually constructed as a direct physical challenge to the divine order itself. Let's get into it.
So, we've all heard the theories, right? The whole ancient aliens idea, extraterrestrial engineers visiting Earth in the distant past. But the source material we're looking at today presents a totally different and highly provocative counter-narrative. According to these texts, the mysterious builders of antiquity weren't visitors from distant star systems at all, but rather the orchestrators of an ancient, cosmic spiritual rebellion. Section 1. The Ancient Alien Deception. Let's see how these texts fundamentally flip this popular modern mystery right on its head.
According to the sources, and these draw really heavily from both biblical and extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch, what modern theorists often misidentify as alien technology is actually the lingering fingerprint of a fallen angelic rebellion against the created order. The ancient Sumerian tales of sky gods? Well, the texts argue those are just corrupted memories of these fallen beings, specifically known as the Watchers, who intentionally abandoned their heavenly domain.
Okay, moving to Section 2, Descent of the Watchers. Let's track the documented arrival of these beings and see exactly what they brought with them. The Book of Enoch is a key text in this framework, and it explicitly states that a group of exactly 200 Watchers literally descended from the heavenly firmament. The sources heavily emphasize that they didn't fly in on spaceships from distant galaxies. They stepped down from a physical vaulted dome above the Earth to deliberately corrupt God's design. Now take a look at this specific list of forbidden heavenly knowledge they transmitted. It's essentially a massive, unauthorized data dump. Scholars like Joseph Lumpkin note that beings like Azazel taught humanity metallurgy for weapons, while others brought down advanced mathematics and astronomy. Suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, primitive men had the know-how to build impossible structures and wage unprecedented war. But the texts are super clear. This wasn't just technological instruction. It was biological corruption. By introducing enchantments and root cuttings, which you can kind of think of as ancient biohacking, the Watchers sought to permanently alter human and spiritual biology. They were literally trying to unmake the original template designed by the Creator.
That brings us to Section 3, Rise of the Nephilim. This catastrophic biological corruption leads us straight to the terrifying fallout of that event.
The sources argue that the physical hybridization of angels and humans produced the Nephilim. Described right there in Genesis chapter 6, these were a literal hybrid race of giants. The texts propose that their sheer physical size and insatiable appetites required a massive, megalithic infrastructure just to sustain their earthly dominion.
Tracing this timeline is absolutely crucial because it reveals how the Watchers' knowledge survived the Great Flood. According to authors like Gary Wayne, that forbidden knowledge and corrupted genetics didn't just wash away. They were carried through the floodwaters via Noah's son Ham, and specifically his son Mizraim, who actually went on to establish post-flood Egypt. Section 4, Monuments of Rebellion. So how did this surviving knowledge actually manifest physically into the megalithic architecture we still marvel at today?
The sources point to the extreme precision and massive scale of the Giza pyramids as undeniable proof of non-human Nephilim capability. I mean, we're talking about 2.3 million stones. Actually, pause and think about that scale for a second. Some of these weigh up to 80 tons, transported hundreds of miles, and aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree. The texts argue, quite bluntly, that this simply isn't the work of ordinary guys with copper chisels.
Instead, the texts suggest these monuments were erected through a terrifying combination of three things. First, you have that heavenly mathematics transmitted by the Watchers. Second, the sheer brute strength of post-flood Nephilim giants. And keep in mind, some texts describe these beings as 15 to 30 feet tall. And finally, corrupted spiritual technologies that allow them to manipulate mass in ways that completely defy modern engineering. Which brings up the million-dollar question. If they weren't just tombs for pharaohs, and they definitely weren't alien landing pads, what was the actual purpose of these massive structures according to this biblical cosmology? Section 5, the Counterfeit Kingdom. This brings us to the ultimate, chilling agenda behind the architecture.
The pyramid's shape itself, the sources claim, was deeply intentional. It was engineered as a counterfeit holy mountain to mimic the divine dwelling place. According to the texts, it was basically a physical, architectural expression of Lucifer's ambition to exalt his earthly throne right above the stars.
The texts outline a handful of very specific, very sinister purposes for these structures. They weren't tombs, they were temples of false resurrection, centered entirely around the Osiris cult. They acted as giant occult libraries, encoded with geometry to preserve that forbidden Watcher knowledge, and served as mystery religion hubs designed to bind human souls to a fallen spiritual system.
And here's where it gets really wild. The sources describe the pyramids as effectively spiritual antennae. Because they're perfectly aligned to Orion and true north, the texts claim these structures functioned as astronomical weapons. They were attempting to literally pierce or commune through the physical dome of the biblical firmament to reconnect with the heavenly realm the Watchers had lost.
And the texts point out that we see this exact same cosmological assault attempted at the Tower of Babel. Post-flood humanity, still completely infected with Watcher knowledge, tried to build a structure to physically reach into the heavenly realm. It was a direct architectural rebellion, and as we know, it led straight to the confounding of human language.
This framework even claims to explain a major historical timeline. Why on earth were the Israelites kept in Egypt for exactly 400 years? Well, according to the sources, they were placed directly in the epicenter of this spiritual warfare. They had to be tested against the ultimate post-flood Nephilim false worship system before they could be called out into the wilderness.
By contrasting these two systems side by side, the sources present ancient history not as some slow, steady march of human progress, but as an epic, literal war. It's an all-out battle between God's divine order, relying on a pure bloodline to bring about redemption, and the Watchers' counterfeit kingdom, which is entirely built on idolatry, genetic corruption, and megalithic temples.
So I'll leave you with this final paradigm-shifting thought that really asks you to completely re-evaluate the true origins of every ancient ruin on Earth. When you look at the monolithic stones of Giza or Baalbek, are you seeing testaments to ancient human greatness, or are you actually looking at the lingering shadows of a counterfeit kingdom? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and definitely keep looking closely at the history set in stone.